rock and roll is supposed to make you feel.
Cette semaine, Madame et Série vous emmène dans les coulisses de la série qu'elle attend depuis 1 an. Et pour une fois, elle va se taire et laisser la parole au maître des lieux, Martin Scorsese et Mick Jagger.
This project began almost 20 years ago when Mick Jagger first approached me about doing a feature film set in the world of rock and roll, about the rock and roll business.
I just had this idea for a movie. I went to see Marty, who I knew already, and we just talked about it and started to develop it.
We tried for a number of years to pull it together as a feature, and eventually Terry Winter got involved, and he suggested that we make it into a TV series because it's so rich.
Action. You know what they call this label out there in the world?
Roll, please.
American Cemetery, where artists go to die.
The funny thing about telling stories about the rock world is that the real stories are crazier than anything I could ever make up. Sometimes to the point where I say, no one will believe this. It's just an absolute insane time period and an insane business.
Well, go out and kick somebody's ass.
That sort of encouraged incredibly raucous, irresponsible, but very fun behavior.
That's what I want.
When I started in this business, rock and roll was real and pure.
Mr. Finestra, is there a problem with the document?
We started this company from nothing.
Right, and now we're selling it.
I'm talking about our dreams, man. You don't understand.
Okay, here's what I do understand, Richie. You're high.
Yeah, what? So what? Hell!
It's a privilege to do this job, to introduce the world to new music, to shape the culture.
Richie, we're gonna be bankrupt in a month.
Present day, 1973 in New York City, following the life and career of Richie Finestra.
The time is now.
His creation of American Century Records is not in good shape.
Going in a new direction.
Trying to bring us into the future.
While you're over there in the future, I'm here in the present trying to keep the lights on.
Hey, we're about to turn a corner.
That's exactly what the Nazis told my Uncle Isaac. Showers, right around the corner.
I want fresh artists today.
I have something. I think they're pretty good.
Where'd you find them?
I saw the singer on the subway and I liked his look.
That's what I'm talking about.
Do you have any idea how screwed we are?
Vinyl nous fait voyager dans le temps jusqu'en 1973, année charnière pour le rock'n'roll, mais aussi de nouveaux genres émergents.
Well, the city of New York in the early 70s was at this low point, with a crime rate that was really high. As is often the case, however, tumultuous times and circumstances can prove to be fertile ground for producing great artists.
There was also something authentic about what New York was. There was an exciting struggle that we were all going through, and it's really dangerous.
The 70s was the most interesting period because so many different things were happening. 73 specifically was the year that punk, disco, and hip-hop all were invented within a 6-month period of each other, within about a 5-mile radius of each other in New York City.
We recreated Max's Kansas City, and Devin is hanging out there, as well as Bruce Springsteen, John Lennon, Bob Marley and Peter Tosh are on stage with the Wailers. And I said, no, wait a minute, this seems very stacked with very famous people. Are we just loading this scene with recognizable faces? And the producer said, no, this was a real night. A night that didn't seem historic at the time because it was just another great night of music in New York.
New York in the 70s was very interesting. It was very interesting from an artistic point of view in lots of areas of the arts, music, painting, literature, and dance. So it's a fascinating time for New York, and it's also a time when New York's in a very bad financial state and not a really good place to live. Or if you bring out a family or something like that, it's horrible. If you're single and a musician, it's slightly different.
We get a peek into that time, a time that really is a beloved time by many people who are fans of rock and roll, particularly American rock and roll and New York City rock and roll.
We are telling our story in the most exciting environment imaginable because all the people that we still draw inspiration from today as musicians were there.
La musique, les musiques prennent vie dans un New York 70s reconstitué à la perfection.
Working in the 70s is really interesting because everything is so rich and full of color and reality. Nothing is really perfect. In the 70s, everything was just kind of flowing.
It's a period when people were really feeling free to explore themselves in their clothing, in the way they looked. People were interested in reinventing themselves. And sometimes we will be in the shop just staring at this clothing and going, what drugs were they on when they created this? This was first time, I think probably in American culture, where people got interested in vintage clothing. So suddenly you've got, young people in the village running around in 1930s clothing and 20s and 50s and mixing it all up with the contemporary clothing. And that's what's really fun about this period.
The 70s is so fun because it has so many different types of looks. You have your rock star, you have your glam rocker, you have your punk rocker, you have the mainstream, you have the hippies, you have like the leftover 60s. So it was a lot going on in the 70s.
Parmi les lieux historiques recréés pour la série, il y a la mythique Silver Factory de Andy Warhol.
John Dunn and I seem to be able to have an uncanny ability to match the walls to the clothing of the actors.
Okay, I'm gonna film you now.
Andy Warhol's Silver Factory. That was a lot of fun. We used a building in Brooklyn, a warehouse in Brooklyn. He covered the entire place in aluminum foil and silver paint, and we did the same. American Century is our home base set, really, in a way.
When you go in there and you see all the things you don't see anymore, like the reel-to-reel tape boxes, the different kinds of playbacks, the cassettes, all the equipment, and all the stuff that's laying around, and the magazines that don't really mean anything anymore, and yeah, it really brings you back.
It's funny to think of this as an historical piece because, to me, particularly when I was on the set, I'd look around, everybody was dressed in 1973 styles, and suddenly felt very comfortable because I'd been there. I lived through this one, so I got very strong opinions on the way things should look and sound.
It's fast. It's dirty. It smashes you over the head. That's rock and roll.
Une épopée rock racontée par les plus grands, c'est tous les lundis en US+24 sur OCS City.